My search for the greatest film of all time has now reached 1974. It wasn't a good year for football. England were not at the World Cup finals. But what sort of year was it for movies? Welcome to my ranking for films which came out in the year 1974, or at least the ones that I've seen anyway, and there are 12 of those. Originally I had 11 when I started to write them down the other day, but I've watched one more film over the past week just to bump the numbers up a little bit. Just a quick reminder that the top film today will go through to the grand final later down the line, and the film which comes second will probably join it, numbers permitting. So let's get into it then and find out what is my 12th favourite movie that came out in 1974. This is probably a better movie than its place on this list because both times I tried to watch it, I was way too young. I was 6, 7, 8, I can't remember now. But the only reason why I even tried to watch it is because Roger Moore is in the lead role. And when I was a kid, I just automatically thought to myself that if Roger Moore's in it, then it must be like a James Bond film. And so I had to put it on. Movies don't work that way though, and even though it's been a long time since I saw Gold, I imagine that it's a much slower paced thriller than your standard James Bond film, because all I remember about this film is being bored for most of the duration. I think there's a bit about half an hour in where Roger Moore's character fights somebody in a mine and hits them over the head with a gold bar or something, and at that point I remember thinking, oh great, the action's starting to kick into gear, we're good to go now. And then just after that, I think the pace slows down again. I'm not even sure if I got to the end of this film both times I watched it. Will I ever go back to it? No. If I was ever going to do that, I think I would have done it when Roger Moore passed, but I can't see any situation now where I would go back and watch Gold. So sadly, even though it was sort of handicapped by me watching it at a stupid time of my life, it is today's bottom ranked film. This came out in 1939, but it was re-released in 74. And the reason why I'm allowing it to enter the competition is because I'm not planning to do any rankings for films of 1939, because if I did, I would only have one film to put in there, Gone with the Wind. Now, I'm not usually into romantic period dramas, but I just so happened to watch this particular one about 10 years ago with my wife. We watched it on a lazy Sunday afternoon. It's about 4 hours long. We watched it all in one sitting. And to be fair, I never got bored during the film. It just about kept my attention. It's not a bad story if you're into this sort of thing. There's a famous scene towards the end of this, which everybody's probably seen, even if they've never seen the movie. It's where this guy and a woman are stood quite close, and he says something like, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn." And I spent most of my life thinking that that must have been some kind of reference to the fact that she cheated on him or something. That seemed a natural fit, but actually that's not the case. When you watch the movie, you realise that he's angry with her just because she's carried a candle for some other bloke, even though she's never done anything with him. So it's kind of weird. There was a sequel to this which was just for TV, and my wife went on to watch that because she was into these characters and Gone with the Wind and stuff. I didn't take that journey with her. Apparently the two characters get back together in that second film. A weird thing about the main cast members in this, the four main actors, 3 of them went on to die in their 50s, and one of them ended up living until they were 104. It's really weird. That just goes to show how completely unpredictable life is. So here we have the film which I watched just last week. It's a slow-moving thriller starring Gene Hackman as a surveillance expert, and he uncovers this nefarious plot. He's not exactly sure what it is that he's uncovered, actually, but he investigates this for the rest of the movie, and there's some good tension and suspense in this. We've no idea where this plot's going to go. I was never bored, but if there's a reason why it's down at 10th on this list and not higher, it's just that I found the main character's level of paranoia to be quite irritating, actually. And the final scene in this movie, I won't spoil what happens, but I just found all that stuff to be a little bit on the ridiculous side. So it's a high quality thriller for its day, but I certainly didn't fall in love with it. It's definitely a watch one and done for me. So like Gone with the Wind, here we have another film which came out way before the year that we're doing today, and yet it was re-released in 74. So for that reason, I'm going to allow it to enter the competition at this stage on a technicality. And I'll also say that this is probably my favourite of the really old school Disney animation classics. I love the world that's been created within this film. It's really silly and zany, all the stuff that Alice gets up to inside it. You know, sometimes when you sit down to watch a film with your kids and you're just thinking to yourself, oh God, this is going to be pure tedium for an hour and a half, you know, depending on what particular animated film they've picked that day. Well, if they were watching Alice in Wonderland, no problem. I would enjoy it just as much as them. When they brought out a remake for this in 2010, I was really enthusiastic about going to the cinema to see it, actually. And in the end, I went with my wife. We had a good time. And we even went back for the sequel in 2016, 2017, Through the Looking Glass, I think it was called. But in terms of this original classic, I am not afraid to say on my channel that I enjoy it and that it is a really good film. So yet another Bond film bites the dust. That's now 3 that have been eliminated in this competition. Will any of them get through to the grand final? We will see. Although what I will say is that The Man with the Golden Gun is probably my second least favourite Bond film after Die Another Day. It's not one of the better ones, to be honest. I like the villain's lair that the villain Scaramanga has got. We get to see it at the start of the film and at the end. I love those segments, but everything in between that, which mostly takes place in Thailand, is not that enthralling. And I think Roger Moore was still sort of learning how to play his best version of James Bond at this stage. There's some forced humour in this film, which is not that good as well. So in all honesty, I think The Man with the Golden Gun has done well to even get to number 8 on this list, to be honest. It's not one of the better ones. Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell is the 7th and final film in Hammer's Frankenstein series. It began in 1957 with The Curse of Frankenstein, and this was the final one in 74. And this was a good way for the series to end. Peter Cushing came back for this one. He was in the first 5 films, and then he wasn't in the 6th one. They tried to reboot it with a younger actor, but obviously that wasn't as successful, I presume, because they brought back Cushing for this 7th and final installment, and it's one of the better ones. And there's a good bit of character development because Frankenstein in this film has started to lose the use of his hands, so he has to get an assistant in to help him, just like he did back in the second film, The Revenge of Frankenstein. And the monster that they create in this one is really well designed. It's a little bit like an ape, I guess. And they've got a good location as well. They've got this insane asylum that they use for this film. And I just think it's a really good way for the series to end. So here we have an interesting bit of symmetry because I was just talking about Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell, which is the 7th and final film in a franchise. Here we have From Beyond the Grave, which is also a 7th and final film in a franchise. In this case, it's the 7th and final film in the Amicus horror anthology series of the 60s and 70s. This is by no means the best, but it's by no means the worst either. I can't remember that many of the stories in this one. There's one where Donald Pleasance is playing this kind of sinister guy, and him and his daughter are not quite what they seem. And there's another one that involves this weird portal, I think. I'm very hazy on the details now. It was only last year that I watched it. I definitely remember the framing device, though, because Peter Cushing plays this shop owner, and we keep cutting back to him between each of the stories. And it turns out that he's got this weird coffin trap in his shop, which kills this guy, and in the end, it's a bit of a weird ending, but kind of cool at the same time. So yeah, I really like From Beyond the Grave, and it gets 6th place in today's ranking. So as you can probably guess from the picture, this is a disaster film about a skyscraper which is on fire and there are loads of people trapped up top. It stars Steve McQueen and Paul Newman, and apparently they both insisted that they had an equal amount of lines of dialogue for this film because neither one of them wanted to give way to the other in terms of who was going to be the biggest star on the picture. I mean, I just find that to be the most ridiculous thing if it's true. The reason why I came to this film, because I don't watch that many disaster films, is because I had this housemate back at uni who had this film on DVD. He was a big fan of it, so he bunged it on one afternoon, and I watched it with him, and I quite enjoyed it actually. And I've always wondered what a remake of this might look like. I guess the reason why we may never see it is because it would probably feel a bit too much like 9/11 for comfort, but I don't know. But it's definitely a film that I would recommend if you're into this sort of thing anyway. I love the Death Wish films. I've seen all five of them. Some of them I've seen several times over. Paul Kersey is just a legendary character of cinema, in my opinion. I think this first one is probably the only one in the series which has merit as a decent story. Most of the others are just an excuse for Charles Bronson to go off and kill dozens more people. I'm not saying that the first is my favourite necessarily. I've never even tried to rank these films. I've seen them all at completely different parts of my life and usually in a completely random order. I think the first one, the first film, is the last one that I saw actually to complete my set of having seen all of them. I've never seen the remake though. I can tell you which was the first Death Wish film I ever saw. That was number 2. I saw it way too young and I was a bit freaked out by the violence, especially when some woman's getting attacked in her apartment at the start of the film. I was really like, oh, as like a kid, 7, 8, 9, I don't know what I was at the time. But this first Death Wish film that we're talking about today, or meant to be talking about today, it's got a slower pace than the others, but it's got a nice mood. I love the character and the journey that he goes on, and the film's got a really nice ending as well. So the highest ranked film today to miss out on the grand final is The Godfather Part 2. If you're with me for my 1972 rankings, you'll remember that The Godfather Part 1 finished in second place for that year, so it may end up in the grand final. That's about right in terms of where these two films have finished in their respective lists, because I do prefer Part 1 in this series. I just think it has a better story, better characters. If there's one thing that possibly lets down part 2 a little bit for me, it's just the fact that it goes back and forth between different eras of the Corleone family. I mean, it's still high quality stuff. I'm just giving you reasons why I nudge part 1 slightly ahead of part 2. But let me be clear, part 2 is still an amazing movie. I've watched it several times throughout my life, despite the fact that it's a really long film. I think it's something like 3 hours and 20 minutes or something. But if I was going to rank all 3 Godfather movies, I would have like 1 and 2 up here, separated by a smidgen, and then part 3 way down below. But it is eliminated, and we move on to the top 2. So let's find out what is our playoff spot holder today with the second ranked film. Let's find out what it is. So number 2, we have the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now this is going to be a controversial placing for people who have seen The Godfather Part 2, but who have never seen Texas Chainsaw, because on the surface, this sounds like a really schlocky, overly gory film that's probably a piece of rubbish. That's what I thought before I saw it. But then I did watch it around about 2003, and I was amazed by how good it is. It's a really simplistic storyline, but it's dripping with atmosphere. It's not actually as gory as you would think. Not a lot of people die in it. The name of the film is quite misleading, actually. Now, I do have a love-hate relationship with the sequels. I think most of those are not worth much at all, but you can't deny that this first film is absolutely brilliant. It will always be a complete and utter classic as far as I'm concerned. I do think it's the sort of series that didn't need any sequels, and I'm usually a person who loves sequels, even if they're not as good as the first film in a series or the first 2 films in a series. But when it comes to Texas Chainsaw, there's such a gulf between the first one and the rest that it does make me a little bit sad that they went on to make so many. But it's quite telling, actually, that the first sequel to Texas Chainsaw didn't turn up for about 12, 13 years. So it's not like there was an obvious sequel there to begin with, and then they just got into them, and now they sort of make them every 2 or 3 years, and they're not usually that good. But Texas Chainsaw is in second place. It gets the playoff spot, and we may yet see it in the grand final further down the line. But it was beaten by one film in 1974. So let's find out what that is. Drum roll. Boom. Yep, Black Christmas takes this one, and I only saw this for the first time just before this most recent Christmas, actually. I can't believe that I have never discovered this film up until fairly recently. And what makes it a little bit surprising that I even gave it a chance is the fact that I watched the 2019 remake in cinemas, and I found it to be absolutely awful. But I heard a few opinions here and there that the original from '74 was really good, so I gave it a try, and whoa, was I blown away. I mean, this is just an amazing slasher film. It's got a great location in this really extravagant student house. I mean, it's like no student house I ever lived in personally. A little bit unrealistic there, but I just love this film. It's got some great actors in it as well. Olivia Hussey, Margot Kidder, and John Saxon. It's just a wonderful story with twists and suspense in all the right places, some good kills, and this is definitely going to be a regular fixture in my horror year from now on. I think this is a really, really great film, and it gets an automatic place in the grand final. So Black Christmas is the winner today, but there is one more question I have to ask myself before I wrap up. I'm going to name three today, and one of them I really regret having not seen in time for this ranking. It's the original Murder on the Orient Express. Now, I actually looked into the possibility of renting this the other night, but sadly it's not on any of the streaming platforms that I have, so I wasn't able to watch it, and I didn't really have enough time to possibly weigh up the idea of ordering a DVD, so can't include it, though I would still like to watch that at some point in the future. One film I probably won't get around to watching in the future, but I did spot on the Wikipedia lists I was going through the other night, is The Taking of Pelham 123. And the reason why this stuck out to me is because I'm sure my dad passed me a DVD of this a few years ago and said, oh, try this, you'll like it. And I just never got around to watching it, to my shame. Although I'm sure the version he passed me was a remake from later down the line. I'm going to sound really silly now. It turns out there's only one version of The Taking of Pelham 123. I think there might be two versions. I've never seen either of them. And in terms of this 74 one, I'm not sure I ever will, to be honest. But it did stick out to me the other night when I was going through Wiki. And that leaves one more film to mention today, and that is a horror film called And the Beast Must Die, which I would like to get around to watching at some point just because it's got Peter Cushing in it. He is an actor I absolutely adore, and I will always look for new films with him in it. Right, that is it for today. Hope you enjoyed that. I'll be back soon with a rankings for films that came out in 1975. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.